Do you guys see the flickering in front of me over there on that railing? I mean, when I zoom in, it stabilizes a little bit, but do you see the part I'm talking about there? Now, this is only there at certain times, at certain angles, but this is a problem with DLSS upscaling, right? It's not able to temporally stabilize that issue, but wait, we have the 2.0 update for Cyberpunk, which comes with DLSS Ray Reconstruction. I'm testing this out on the RTX 4070, and we are currently in the path tracing mode of the game, RT Overdrive, which is unfortunately the only version of the only settings in the game that have Ray Reconstruction available. Anyway, if I kick on Ray Reconstruction, notice that that's stable now. It looks a lot better. I'm moving backward and forward, zooming in, zooming out, the same kind of stuff I did in motion. This is not just when you're standing still, and that looks significantly more stable up on that railing, which is excellent. And it's not just a fluke. If I kick Ray Reconstruction off, yeah, we're back to a kind of a flickering mess at certain angles and certain movements on that railing. So that's the thing. Ray Reconstruction can affect performance, but its primary purpose is not a performance benefit. It is an image quality benefit, but again, only available in the path tracing mode. Notice if I go to RT Ultra, DLSS Ray Reconstruction is grayed out. Now the good news is this is available on any RTX GPU, so RTX 20, 30, and 40 series. However, you're going to need a pretty powerful GPU to be playing around in the RT Overdrive mode. Again, right now we're looking at the game at 1440p resolution, RT Overdrive mode. I was on DLSS quality with, in this case, Ray Reconstruction toggling on and off with frame generation disabled, although you can certainly enable that as well. I'll also note that you can't turn off Super Resolution and use Ray Reconstruction. Notice that if I turn DLSS upscaling off, the Ray Reconstruction disappears. If you try to use DLAA to play at native resolution, it does not appear to be compatible with Ray Reconstruction. At first, I thought I could trick the game. If you go to DLSS Super Resolution to get the Ray Reconstruction turned on and then enable DLAA, it seems like you can now kick off Super Resolution and have both of these enabled. However, if you actually click Apply, the Ray Reconstruction turns off and DLAA remains active. So you are unable to use Ray Reconstruction at the game's native resolution, even if trying to use DLAA for your native resolution anti-aliasing. So it currently seems to be a part of the Super Resolution pipeline, and that exclusively and only when you are in RT Overdrive mode. So those are kind of the big downsides. Like I said, it's also can provide some performance benefits, although that's not the primary purpose. If we look at this scene again that we were just looking at here, you can see that we're kind of hanging out around 43 FPS as the performance stabilizes there. And if I turn Ray Reconstruction off, but keep everything else the same, give it a second to stabilize, we're now closer to the 40 FPS range. So performance in the scenes I'm looking at here is better with Ray Reconstruction on, but that's really a side effect. The primary goal is image quality. So while this scene I had particularly selected to show off at the start of the video, let's load up some just random other scenes and see if we can notice any sorts of issues. I'm curious about rain, because I had some issues with rain in the path tracing mode before this Ray Reconstruction update. So let's see what we can test out here. Again, looking for image quality rather than performance. I will do some side-by-side performance testing as well. Okay, do you guys see how flickery and unstable this scene is right here? This helicopter door, the characters around it with the rain going by and all of that. Let's go ahead and kick Ray Reconstruction on and see if it does anything for us. Again, keeping everything else the same. And it absolutely does seem to be more stable, and it doesn't just make the rain disappear. I can still see that there is rain here, but this looks significantly less flickery in that area. So yeah, overall, I feel like we're seeing an improvement to the image quality in this scene. let's jump around a little bit more. One area, yeah, I think this would have the kind of flooring I'm looking for. My main complaint with DLSS upscaling in this game, in general, regardless of whether I'm in the path tracing mode or whatever, is actually straight lines in pavement and concrete flooring. This is especially apparent in a lot of the corpo areas of the game. First, let's turn Ray Reconstruction off and then see if there's any improvement with it on. Whoa, okay, I think you guys can see what I'm talking about here. Do you guys see this flooring, especially when I'm not zoomed in on it? And look at it in motion. Do you see how aliased that looks? That's been one of my main issues with DLSS in this game, just in general, since the game's launch. And it's still been issues. I'm curious if Ray Reconstruction will do anything for us in this particular context. Okay, standing still, it certainly seems more stable. And in motion, I can still see some aliasing. But it certainly seems to be less aliasing. I think you guys would agree. So maybe didn't completely solve the problem, but certainly seems to have diminished the amount of aliasing I was seeing on that flooring. We can go ahead and kick Ray Reconstruction back off to compare. I certainly feel like the flooring has sharper lines with Ray Reconstruction off, but on those sharper lines, there's significantly more aliasing, which I do find distracting. So in general, I'm not really an image quality comparison, specialist, I guess I might say. But at least some of my issues with the game in general, and these random scenes that I'm picking out, do seem to be improved with Ray Reconstruction turned on. What I'd like to do now is more what I'm comfortable being more of an expert on, is measuring performance. So let's do some side-by-sides in the built-in benchmark, and also not just look at Ray Reconstruction on versus off, but look at the 2.0 version of Cyberpunk versus the 1.63 version of Cyberpunk that we had before enabling, before the 2.0 update. And then also maybe look at some other GPUs besides the 4070. But I thought the 4070 is interesting in that at $550, if you are going to go the 40 series route, I think this is the the one with the most graphical oomph that somebody might actually be able to afford. Anyway, let's hop into some side-by-side benchmarks. Before we go any further with Ray Reconstruction, I do want to just look at the patch 2.0 performance. And here I was interested in the CPU performance because I'd seen some posts from the developers about increasing the CPU workload and things like that. And it does look like the Ryzen 5 5600 at 1080p Ultra when CPU limited is performing worse on the 2.0 update than we saw on the 1.63 patch that we had before the 2.0 update. And so that's a bit disappointing to see, but it's also hard to get, exact traffic conditions exactly the same here. This is walking down the same pathway in the city anyway. But I am seeing that the old version of the game was running 17% faster at these same settings. Now, enabling ray tracing does also increase CPU workload, so I was curious if we'd also see a similar result with ray tracing ultra settings enabled, and that's what we're looking at here. And it's again true that the 1.63 patch did perform better than the patch 2.0. However, here it's only a 7% performance bump on the old patch versus the new patch. So not as dramatic with the ray tracing enabled. I also tested out my Ryzen 7 7800X3D CPU. This is 8-core 16-thread, and the developers had specifically mentioned using more cores on CPUs that had them. And interestingly, while the performance is still lower on patch 2.0, the CPU usage total is higher. Here we're seeing, upper 60s versus mid 40s percentage of the CPU being used. So it does seem like it is using more of the 16 threads available to it. But I wonder if some of their updates to the city, I know the AI of the police chases and things have gotten better, things like that. So anyway, I also tested out RT Ultra, and in this one, I'm actually seeing basically the same performance with actually patch 2.0 with a 2% lead. That's probably margin of error, again, especially in this city environment. So it does look like there were some changes to CPU performance, and it looks more dramatic when you're not using ray tracing. But anyway, let's get into GPU performance between the two patches. So this is the RTX 4070 at 1440p Ultra settings, and we're seeing patch 1.63 versus patch 2.0 on the right-hand side. We're seeing very, very similar performance. It's 75 versus 77 by the end of the game's built-in benchmark run, which is a 3% performance improvement for the new patch, but it's also a very small difference. 1 or 2 FPS can be margin of error, but it's also likely that some patch 2.0 changes might have affected performance slightly. Now, here I thought I'd test out an AMD GPU. This is the 7800 XT at 1440p Ultra, although this also had an older driver on the patch 1.63 because I'm using my test I ran for my launch review of the 7800 XT on the launch review driver. But either way, we're only seeing a 2 FPS difference, which is 97 versus 99, so a 2% performance increase on patch 2.0, although again, there is the driver difference thrown into the mix on that one. But let's look at the RTX 4090. This is 4K Ultra, and here we're seeing 82 FPS versus 83 FPS on the new patch, which is a 1 frame per second difference and about 1%. So again, not a huge difference, although I will note that while all these differences could be just within margin of error, the built-in benchmark run is pretty consistent, and we are seeing the 1 to 3% performance increase consistently on the side of patch 2.0. So it looks like not a lot of change to GPU performance. Anyway, let's start talking about Ray Reconstruction. So this is the main focus of the video, and I was interested in testing how it runs on, 20 series cards, 30 series, 40 series, a lot of different cards. Let's start out with the RTX 2060. This is the original 6GB version of the card. And since Ray Reconstruction is only available in RT Overdrive mode, here we are. We're running DLSS at the performance settings, so we are running at a very low internal resolution. We are seeing a 10% performance increase with Ray Reconstruction, but look at the image quality. Look at the puddle right now. Look at how flickery the puddle was with Ray Reconstruction off. Versus with it on, we saw not only a much clearer reflection, but just the weird shimmering around the puddle was a lot worse with Ray Reconstruction off. However, the overall performance of this GPU is making this really more just an academic exercise, because I don't think anyone is going to be wanting to use these settings for anything other than maybe screenshots if they're running an RTX 2060. So let's look at the RTX 3060. The increased performance, as well as going up to 12 gigabytes of VRAM, the RT Overdrive mode uses more than 6 gigabytes, which was all our 2060 had. Now we're seeing much better performance. This is still DLSS at the performance settings, but now we're actually getting playable frame rates. This still might not be how you would choose to play the game, but also we can look at the image quality differences as well as performance differences. Again, I'm interested in looking at the puddle as we go by it. That was pretty dramatic on the 2060. Again, it looks a lot more shimmery and the reflection a lot less defined on the left-hand side of the screen. Another thing I'm noticing, and this is something I saw when RT Overdrive mode first came out, is if you look at the left-hand side of the screen, I don't know if you'll notice, but every now and again, there's just these little sparkles, these little flashes and sparkles, which I think is a denoising issue that I'm just not seeing happen on the right-hand side of the screen with Ray Reconstruction. So definitely image quality benefits, and we're again seeing a 9% performance bump as well. Since we were so playable with DLSS at the performance setting, here I decided to try out the quality setting, and we can get around 30 FPS, and it's 30 versus 33. So again, about a 10% performance bump with Ray Reconstruction. But again, looking at image quality here as well. Again, keep your eye out for weird little sparkles and flashes on the left-hand side of the screen. It's hard to point them out, but I promise you they're there. And it does look a lot more stable on the right-hand side of the screen. Again, the puddle is a very dramatic difference between the two sides. But again, overall performance-wise, I'm just not convinced that the 3060 is giving the performance numbers that you would want to get really excited about this update, since the Ray Reconstruction is currently limited to the RT Overdrive mode. And yeah, DLSS quality settings here were around 30 FPS. Again, might be fun for screenshots or playing around, or maybe if you're on a controller or something. But let's try out the RTX 4060. First, we'll try out DLSS at the performance mode again at 1080p. And now we got 3 screens up because we have Ray Reconstruction off on the left, on in the middle, and then I thought I'd try kicking on frame gen combined with Ray Reconstruction on the far right. Performance-wise, we're seeing a 7% performance bump with Ray Reconstruction on. And again, image quality-wise, I'm seeing a lot similar to what I pointed out already in the other ones. You can't see as much of the puddle with the with the 3-way split. That's one of the downsides here. We could also mention with frame generation, which we'll be testing out in other cards in this video, you can see at the very bottom of the screen, you guys see the latency counters. So you can see that while frame generation does have the highest frame rate here out of the 3 screens, it also has the highest latency, so it will feel the least responsive. Although I've found that, if the PC latency is somewhere in the 50 millisecond or less range, it does feel pretty responsive. Now let's try out DLSS at the quality setting, but otherwise we're looking at the same thing on all 3 sides here. Once again, I'm noticing image quality benefits for Ray Reconstruction on versus off. Another place I've kind of been seeing it as I stare at these side-by-sides is like some of the bottles when they're up close and things like that. I think the edges are a little less stable and more sparkly with Ray Reconstruction off, and they do seem to hold together a little bit better with Ray Reconstruction on. Once again, we have frame generation to look at, but notice the 1% lows on the frame generation here. Also a few more little spikes on the frame time graph. I feel like we might be seeing some VRAM issues possibly, making frame generation not run as smoothly here. Plus, we just have a lower input frame rate, which isn't great here. So I don't think these frame gen settings would feel particularly good to play. So the 4060, I think is struggling a bit here at DLSS quality, but let's test out some other GPUs. How about another 30 series GPU where we don't have frame generation as an option? This is the RTX 3080, and I have the 12 gigabyte version. The original version was 10 gigabyte, but they did launch a 12 gigabyte version, and that's the one I have. Here we're at 1440p now, and we'll start out with DLSS at the performance setting, but we'll test out some other resolutions and other upscaling settings. Again, Ray Reconstruction off on the left and on the right. And again, there's a lot of little subtle things to point out, but I do feel like there's a noticeable image quality benefit. The puddle is by far the most obvious thing, but other little details here and there as well. And again, the performance bump, again, not being the main point, but if you're curious about how the performance bump works, so basically, Ray Reconstruction is replacing the denoising process for the ray tracing in the game, and because it's one denoiser with the AI Ray Reconstruction versus replacing a bunch of older denoisers, there does end up being a performance benefit in this particular game, it looks like, and it does seem to be pretty consistent. Anyway, here, we're looking at DLSS at the quality setting at 1440p, and while at performance settings we were able to be around 60 frames per second, here we're in the 40s, 40 versus 43, so once again we are getting a bit of a performance bump from Ray Reconstruction, and again, they're certainly kind of subtle in motion, but there are image quality benefits on the Ray Reconstruction side as well. And again, these are playable frame rates, but again, I don't think that somebody who has an RTX 3080 is necessarily somebody who's shooting for a 40 frames per second target. And the DLSS performance mode got us closer to 60 frames per second, but you definitely could tell more issues with the upscaling and loss of detail, things like that. So anyway, it is at least something you could play around with on the 3080 and get good results, and Ray Reconstruction is providing a bit of a performance and image quality benefit over what we had before. Here we're looking at 1080p, and I thought this time it would be fun to also compare DLSS completely off, so running the RT Overdrive mode on the left-hand side with no upscaling, and also therefore no Ray Reconstruction. It's just native 1080p, and we're able to hit around 34 FPS by the end of the benchmark run. Running with DLSS quality basically doubles the performance. Ray Reconstruction off, hitting 63 FPS, and Ray Reconstruction on, literally doubling the performance at 68 versus 34. So very, very noticeable there. And once again, an 8% performance bump with Ray Reconstruction on versus off. And I thought this would just be interesting to see what the non-upscaled image looks like on the left-hand side. I do think the palm tree branches look a lot more stable without the DLSS. There's a lot more aliasing on the palm tree branches on the two DLSS images. Let's go ahead and look at some other GPUs. How about the RTX 4070? So the 4070, here we're again able to use frame generation, so I'm including that on the far right. So now it's the left is Ray Reconstruction off, the middle is Ray Reconstruction on, and the right is Ray Reconstruction on with frame generation on. And again, this is all with DLSS at the quality setting. Overall performance without frame generation is pretty similar to what we were seeing on the RTX 3080 with DLSS quality at 1440p, so again around that 40 FPS range. The Ray Reconstruction bumping it up to 43 FPS and seeing that 8% performance bump. Now, frame generation here does bump us up into the 70 FPS range a lot of the time. And I would say that we're at a borderline point where people more sensitive to latency will probably not feel like frame generation is usable here, and people less sensitive to latency or people playing on a controller where it's a lot less noticeable may feel like that's an acceptable choice to make there with frame generation enabled. If we go down to DLSS at the performance mode, our non-frame generated frame rates are a lot better here at 61 and 64 respectively, so a 3 FPS boost, which is about 5% at this performance level. A boost for the Ray Reconstruction, again, in addition to the image quality benefits. Frame generation, coming from around a 60 FPS baseline, I think looks and feels very good. The PC latency here is down well below the 50 millisecond range. I think I've played around, not just looked at the benchmark, I've actually played with these settings, and the game feels very good here. The only question is DLSS performance at 1440p is taking some hit to the image quality to upscale this aggressively. But Ray Reconstruction does make it look better than what we had before Ray Reconstruction was available, at least. Anyway, what we're going to look at now is 1080p resolution. So same kind of split left, middle, and right for Ray Reconstruction off, on, and on plus frame generation. And notice that here at 1080p at DLSS quality, the performance numbers are extremely similar to what we saw at 1440p with DLSS at the performance mode. So if you do have a 4070 but are still on a 1080p screen, actually this looks and plays pretty good. And with the image quality benefits from Ray Reconstruction, I have fewer issues using DLSS quality at 1080p compared to what I've had in the past. Plus, being able to use the RT Overdrive mode itself does have image quality benefits, of course. And then with this base frame rate around 60 plus frame generation on, the game does feel pretty responsive. Looks good with the path tracing and the DLSS quality at 1080p with the Ray Reconstruction. I think the image quality is pretty good there. But let's go ahead and break out the big guns, the RTX 4090. We're at 4K resolution now with RT Overdrive at DLSS quality settings, which would be an internal resolution of 1440p and then upscaling. Once again, Ray Reconstruction provides a performance boost as well as an image quality boost. It's a 9% performance boost going from 46 to 50 FPS. And then we can kick on frame generation on the far right-hand side of the screen. We're seeing that. And once again, I feel like from this base frame rate, it's gonna be hit or miss for people depending on personal preferences. Some people might find the latency a bit much here. Also, the lower the base frame rate, the more often you'll notice image quality artifacts from the generated frames. But overall, I think some people would find this pretty usable. And overall, again, nice to see the image quality uplift for the Ray Reconstruction. And so yeah, there's the RTX 4090 at 4K, but what if you did want higher performance? You could go to DLSS performance, which at 4K resolution, I'm on a 48-inch screen. So for me, I don't like upscaling this aggressively. If you were on a smaller 4K screen, maybe you would find this more acceptable. You certainly get a lot of performance bump, getting our base frame rates without frame generation to actually averaging 70 and 72 respectively for Ray Reconstruction off versus on. That's a 3% bump, so not huge on the performance benefits here. But again, we do get some image quality benefits in addition to the little bit of performance bump. And again, now the base frame rate being so much higher, frame generation here feels very good, over 100 frames per second when you include the generated frames. And the game's responsiveness, again, at least for me personally, feels very good at these settings. And so again, I think, well, this feels and plays very good, and RT Overdrive looks very good here on my large 4K screen. The DLSS performance is a bit questionable. Now, if you're using a 4090 on a 1440p display, and you want to use RT Overdrive at the DLSS quality setting, which is looking very, very good, now we're talking some real numbers. The Ray Reconstruction off is giving us 85 FPS, Ray Reconstruction on bumping that up to 91 FPS, which is a 7% bump. But both of those numbers feel very responsive even without generating any frames. Now, if you have a high refresh rate display, maybe 165 Hz 1440p monitor, something like that, kick on frame generation and you can take advantage of a lot of the increased motion fluidity. And with this high of base frame rate, the game feels very responsive. And while I do occasionally see image quality artifacting happening, especially with text and things like that, and other things, driving, stuff like that, I can notice some stuff. Overall, I think my preferred way to play the game with the 4090 at 1440p is what we're seeing on the right-hand side of the screen there. I actually played around with it quite a bit at those settings on an ultra-wide 1440p monitor, and it felt and looked very good. Here, I just thought we'd finish up with some fun tests. Now we're looking at, what if you played the game at native 1440p resolution without any ray tracing? That's what we're seeing on the left-hand side of the screen. Just ultra settings, no ray tracing, no upscaling, no DLSS, no frame generation, none of that. On the right-hand side of the screen, we're seeing the RT Overdrive mode with the DLSS at quality settings, Ray Reconstruction on, and frame generation on. So basically all the RTX features. And interestingly, we're getting extremely similar frame rates, although on the left, if you look at the latency down in the bottom, it is more responsive on the left, but what we're getting on the right is still very responsive. And again, you can see the differences in the RT Overdrive image quality versus the one on the left. And so I just thought this would be an interesting comparison for people to make when you want to make the choice on how to play the game. Next, I thought we'd do the same thing with the RTX 4070. So this is 1440p resolution. Again, on the left, we're seeing native ultra settings, no ray tracing. On the right-hand side, we're seeing all the RT Overdrive kicked on, along with DLSS quality, Ray Reconstruction on, and frame generation on. And here they're both producing reasonable frame rates, although the native Ultra is certainly faster. But here we really see the big difference in the PC latency. Where on the right-hand side of the screen, I think many people who are more sensitive to the latency would not prefer what we're doing on the right-hand side of the screen and would instead opt for some other settings, possibly what we're doing on the left-hand side of the screen. But again, I thought it was an interesting comparison to make here with the 4070. And people on a controller or just less sensitive to latency might still actually like what we're seeing on the right there. Another test I thought would be interesting is looking at AMD versus NVIDIA here. And first, at just no ray tracing, no upscaling, just playing the good old rasterized game. 1440p, ultra preset, with any upscaling turned off. And we actually see that the 7800 XT is offering 99 frames per second versus the 80 frames per second on the RTX 4070, which is a 24% advantage in this game. That's actually more than what you'll typically see between these two GPUs, although there are a number of games where that is the case. So and the 7800 XT also costs a bit less than the 4070. So we're seeing AMD's strength, right? Raw, rasterized performance when you're not thinking about upscaling and heavy-duty ray tracing and things like that. There is certainly something to be said for what AMD has on offer here. But it's very clear that NVIDIA has a alternative vision of the future of gaming, and that's what we're going to kind of take a look at here. Play to the RTX 4070's strengths. So here we're looking at RT Overdrive mode with all of the Ray Reconstruction on, and we're upscaling at the performance setting. So a very aggressive upscale. The AMD GPU is running at these same settings, but obviously we can't use DLSS or Ray Reconstruction, so this is FSR 2.1 at the performance setting. And not only is there a massive performance difference, 27 versus 64, the 7800 XT reaching 42% of the 4070's performance. By the way, I do not have frame generation enabled here. This is no frame generation. Not only is there that massive performance difference, but look at the image quality difference. You can see a massive difference. The left-hand side of the screen is just much blurrier, much more aliased, and we get a definite image quality advantage for the RTX 4070, and I think this is kind of the NVIDIA vision of the future of gaming, and it'll be interesting to see how all of this plays out. Thought I'd pop out and give you guys some final thoughts while I just kind of run around some more. Overall, I've got to say Ray Reconstruction seems like a major improvement to the path-traced mode of the game. Here I am playing with it on, DLSS quality frame generation on as well. This is at 1440p, and it is on the 4090. But I've actually been playing the game quite a bit at these settings, although I've actually been playing on an ultra-wide 1440p. Because I do have access to the Phantom Liberty review code, so I've been trying to get a little ways into that, see if that'd be interesting to benchmark, that kind of thing. But in other words, I've been able to play around with this quite a bit, actually just playing the game, not just recording the benchmark section of the game. And this looks really nice. Honestly, 1440p DLSS quality, Ray Reconstruction, and frame generation on looks and plays very responsive. Granted, it's a 4090, but like I said, it looks a lot better and performs a little better than before we had Ray Reconstruction. So overall, this is a very good update. I like to see it. My main criticism of it is if we're just in the normal ray tracing ultra mode, that I don't have that available. I did ask the NVIDIA representatives about that, and they did say that the more ray tracing is involved, the more beneficial it is. So they focused on the path tracing mode for now, but that doesn't mean that it couldn't support other modes in the future. Here, let's go ahead and look at the game without ray tracing and all that kicked on. So here we are, just at native 1440p Ultra. And one of the things that I've noticed is, especially looking at the characters in the scenes, and things like that. Like, the game still looks very good at 1440p Ultra, but if I go ahead and switch back to the RT Overdrive mode, which again has only been improved by Ray Reconstruction, I do feel like everything just feels more real and grounded in the scene, I guess is how I would put it. The characters feel less, I don't know, less like they're just kind of like floating there and separated. Everything feels more cohesive. It's interesting. I've been having a lot of fun playing the game and just flipping RT Overdrive on and off again, which is kind of silly. The Ray Reconstruction, especially on things like these puddles and things like that, certainly makes a very noticeable image quality difference, and we saw lots of other places where it makes a difference as well. Again, here we're getting less definition in that puddle, things like that. So overall, I think this is a good update to the technology of the game. But my main downside to it is, well, I mean, like I said, I'm getting great performance right now, but I'm on an RTX 4090, which is $1,600 at 1440p. So it's very interesting to see what NVIDIA's vision of the future of gaming might look like. I have my doubts how many games will see leverage this type of thing. I know Alan Wake, I believe, will be doing it soon. But in general, I think most game developers have, consoles in mind when they're developing their games. And so since they have consoles in mind when they're developing their games, and they obviously aren't going to be supporting all of these features, I am curious how many games we'll get. It seems like you'll have to have a heavy push from NVIDIA for most games to kind of implement this level of ray tracing and this kind of feature set. And again, most people aren't really going to benefit from this, I think, until we see a GPU with the performance level of an RTX 4090, but available for more like the $500 price range. And given how slowly we've seen GPU price to performance ratios improving this generation, and being at least another year to the next generation, how long is it going to be before we see that? But that being said, I am very positive about this update, and I think this is really cool. And I think it is a good thing that NVIDIA is pushing the boundaries of technology and game rendering and trying to get AI in here and just seeing what it can do. I know that, it's just really fun to play around with. So overall, I'm very positive about the update. I didn't really talk about the 2.0 update much itself besides the performance. I have heard that it has some updates to the police chase, so maybe we'll start one of those to kind of finish up the game. And finish up the video, I suppose, But I think I've said most of what I've got to say about this. I think it's a cool update. It's very interesting to play around with, and definitely let me know if you guys are interested in Phantom Liberty benchmarks in the actual Phantom Liberty section of the game. I'm curious how that will perform, given that it. I believe that section of the game isn't backwards compatible to older console generations, so I'm wondering, what they felt they were able to do with it that they didn't do in the normal Cyberpunk base game. That would certainly be interesting to explore. All right. I better just stop rambling. Interested to see what you guys think in the comment section, and I hope all of you have an excellent day.